In this presentation, we're going to discuss how the criminal justice system polices the minorities of our communities. In order to understand this topic, we must first discuss who is even considered a minority. A minority group is a group of the community who is treated unfairly or is at a disadvantage to a group in power. Women, people of color, and individuals of lesser-known religions are all examples of minorities. Throughout this presentation, we hope to discuss why minorities are a focus of the criminal justice system, and if this problem is recognized, how the system can be reformed to offer more equal opportunities of justice. As we have learned throughout the semester, race and economic standing have greatly affected how we view crimes and those who commit them. Historically, acts committed by those at a social disadvantage have been defined as crimes in order to keep them in their lower positions. In contrast, crimes committed against minority groups have been excused because of the status contrast between the offender and the victim. For instance, in Roman law, women were considered property and therefore crimes against women, such as domestic violence and sexual assault, were not even considered crimes. In American history, slavery plays a large role in modern biases within the criminal justice system. One bias is that African Americans do not feel as much pain as white Americans. This idea was started to justify slavery in the pain and suffering that characterized it, but this idea is still believed in the present day. This bias could explain the degree of brutality we have seen against the African American population by the communities, particularly in the South, and the police officers within those communities. Evidence that bias against minorities is made prevalent within our criminal court system by statistics about the average offender. The average defendant in the American court system is typically a male who is poor, uneducated, unemployed, a person of color, or many times a combination of these minority groups. These historical patterns suggest that discretion in the field is directly biased against minorities.
Current issues and events. Relationships between minorities and their police are at an all-time low. The reasons for this include the police abuse of power. This includes anything where police officers have gone out of line of what they should be doing with their job as far as following the law to harass or illegally arrest minority members. Social media has definitely contributed to the bad relationship between the two groups. This includes anything from the videos that we see every day being spread all over very quickly, or even just news outlets being able to get out messages from issues quickly to the public. Another reason is the amount of minority prisoners in the system. Some people can say that the criminal justice system is kind of skewed against minority groups, and the minority groups view the prison system as a great example of that, with the high percentage of the prisoners being members of minorities. And also the fear or non-willingness to help police. Many of these minority communities are kind of taught as they're young that police abuse power a lot, and that as a minority member that you can face these issues very frequently. This was proven in a 2005 study done by the University of Chicago. They reported that minorities within the study reported more negative encounters with the police than the white residents did. A couple examples of high-profile minority versus police issues that have happened lately. One is the case of Philando Castile. He was shot and killed by police during a traffic stop when the police officer saw a gun on him and ended up shooting and killing him. It was later found that the suspect victim had a concealed carry permit, and they ended up going to court and settling with the family and everything. Another case is Tamir Rice. It was a 12-year-old that was playing with a toy gun inside of a park, and when the police pulled up, they saw him playing with the gun, and the gun was very realistic, and they believed that it was real, and unfortunately ended up shooting and killing the kid. Competing perspectives. The police perspective. Police generally feel as if the minority communities do not support them within them doing their jobs. This is caused by the history of issues being taught. As everybody knows, there's always been some sort of issues between the police and minority communities, a lot stemming from the civil rights movements. The minorities typically begin to teach that to the children, and sometimes that viewpoint kind of carries over into the everyday interactions between the two groups. There's also the viewpoint that all officers are the same. This kind of goes along with the issues today. If one officer on one side of the country does something wrong or illegal, it kind of correlates to everybody in the country. People begin to look at all the officers as if they're that same officer. And police also tend to have an everyone is against them mentality. This includes the minorities, the media, and sometimes even politicians. This can often be dangerous as police end up going into their everyday interactions with a negative mindset and expecting people to work against them. Another perspective is the conservative or non-minority perspective. A lot of this side, they feel that the officers are under attack and that people being arrested or sometimes killed generally are criminals and had that coming. This typically stems from people being uneducated on the history of the issue overall. It also includes misunderstandings from both sides due to the media bias. A lot of us will see the same story on two different news outlets, but it tends to be a different perspective or different bias and kind of push people to one side of the issue.
Now we're going to talk about how policing minority communities impacts the society, and the way that police handle these communities impacts society in many different ways. For one thing, it creates less trust in the police, and this changes the way that people respond to the police. So when we don't trust the police, people are more likely to not be cooperative with the police, not want to help them in any way, or come forward with information on an investigation if they have it. Public attitudes towards police have changed drastically. We see a lot more protests and riots due to police practices, and many of these riots started in 2014 with the death of Michael Brown, and since then we've just seen a spike in police brutality and a change in attitudes. And there was a poll done in 2014 that suggests that a majority of Americans feel that police treat racial groups very unequally in comparison to other groups, and minorities are arrested at much higher rates, which isn't really a secret. And we see a lot of stop and frisks, racial profiling, and African American parents have had to start teaching their young Black sons how to behave when they are around police, which just isn't something that anybody should have to deal with. And police strategies result in a hesitancy to cooperate, and that causes police to become cynical towards minorities as well. Now we're going to talk about how this impacts the criminal justice system as a whole. Over the past couple of years, we've seen many police departments across the country having to change their practices. We've seen things like police wearing body cameras. There's also dashboard cameras in police cars, and just different new ways of training how to handle certain situations so that police brutality doesn't happen. And with the body cameras, the idea behind that is that these cameras are supposed to minimize the use of force and increase police accountability and legitimacy, because if they're on camera, then hopefully they'll act in a better way, and it's easier to hold them accountable because we can see what's actually happening. And this lack of trust in the police really just comes back on the whole criminal justice system, because not only do minorities not trust the police, but in turn, they begin to just doubt the whole system, and they assume that if they get arrested, they're going to jail, and they probably won't get a fair trial, or they might get harsher sentences due to their race or their ethnicity. And it really just comes down to, how do we change these perceptions of law enforcement? And at this point, can our perceptions be changed?
So where do we go from here? I think the first step to improvement is acknowledging that there is a problem and that there is a lot of room for improvement. We need to train our police force to view themselves as a part of those minority communities and not just policing over the community. We should be working together with those communities to solve problems and cut down on crime. There needs to be a sense of trust between the individuals in those communities and the police force. This involves officers taking on the perspectives of those in minority communities who may be very different from themselves. Altogether, banning racial profiling and recruiting minority officers, which will help create a more diverse police force. This will also aid in developing a greater sense of trust between minorities, especially Black individuals, and the police. Next, we need to assist those minorities who may have gone to prison and are re-entering back into the community. We need to make sure that they have a good transition from prison back into the workforce and that they are able to get a job and be successful. This can be a big problem for people who have gone to prison and now are trying to find a job but aren't having any success because they may first be discriminated against because of the color of their skin, and then they are also then not wanting to be hired by the corporation because of a criminal record. If we want to better serve these communities, we need to make sure that these people actually have a chance of having access to jobs and that they aren't discriminated against just because they have a criminal record. This involves changing laws to where criminal records are not asked about on an application. They can go through with an interview and wait until the end of an interview to be asked about a criminal record, have a chance to speak for themselves. Also, providing skills training in correctional facilities so that adolescents and adults can successfully enter back into the real world. Overall, there's a clear divide between police and minority communities that needs mending. This divide is evidenced in the police showing unequal treatment among races, distrust between police and minorities, and the media capitalizing on the negative events between police and minorities, which goes on to affect how the public views our police force. To reduce these issues, we need to work with our police to create more positive relationships between themselves and minorities in the community. Rid ourselves of any biases we may have taken on through media outlets, and ensure successful re-entry into society for those minorities who have a criminal record. And thank you for allowing us to share our presentation with you.